This is a final presentation for environmental health and occupational health, section 5102. This is a student presentation using a hypothetical scenario for educational purposes. I am a student at UAMS, and I am not a representative of the agency named in the following slides. The information contained herein does not necessarily reflect the views of said agency. Hello, Mississippi County residents. My name is Nadal Shaw, and I am an environmental health specialist, uh, and I work for the Oklahoma State Health Department. I'm here to give you all a talk over your concerns with atrazine exposure in Mississippi County. Some of the things that I'll be speaking to you all about today is what exactly is atrazine, what it can be used for, and ways that we can find ourselves exposed to atrazine. Also, I'll be mentioning some of the negative health impacts of atrazine and atrazine safety and prevention. Uh, what are some of the measures that we can take to prevent being exposed? And also what to do if we do find ourselves exposed to atrazine, and how we can reduce risk of exposure for our families. So what is atrazine? What is this chemical? Atrazine is in a group of man-made systemic herbicides called triazines. Uh, since it's a member of a triazine chemical class, which includes simazine and probazine, and it is primarily used in agriculture with the greatest use on corn, sorghum, and sugarcane. It's also used to manage broadleaf weeds both before and after sprouting and on some grassy weeds. Although used primarily in agriculture, this herbicide can sometimes have residential use. But what are some of the ways that we can find ourselves exposed to atrazine? Um, so people who live near areas where crops are grown may be exposed to atrazine. Due to atrazine's use as a herbicide, people who live near areas where crops are grown may have a higher risk of exposure through ingestion of contaminated well water. Another way that it can be, you find yourself exposed if you work on a farm, or if you apply herbicides, if you're a railway worker, and if you work in a factory where atrazine is produced. These people generally have a higher risk of exposure from the general population. This is because they're at the forefront of atrazine use. Um, Occupational exposure for farmers is of special concern, though, because they're usually the ones that exhibit the most exposure. They're typically the ones that apply um, this this herbicide on the crops. Typically, farmers who have cornfields, and exposure can occur through ingestion, inhalation, or dermal contact. So farmers are generally the ones that we are more concerned over, because they're the ones that are generally more exposed to it. And the reason why is because the potential effects of direct atrazine contact are quite serious. So what are some of the negative health impacts of atrazine? Um, some of the negative health impacts of being exposed to atrazine include endocrine disruption. So it can alter levels of key hormones and can even delay puberty. Um, Human exposure, though, to atrazine is linked to few known negative health impacts, but it's still, it's still best to take precautions. Like I mentioned, endocrine disruption is one of those things. Atrazine has been shown to cause changes in blood hormone levels in animals, which in turn causes the disruption of the ability to reproduce. Some of the specific effects observed in animals are not likely to occur in humans because of biological differences. Obviously, we have different anatomy, different physiology. So there's different mechanisms where atrazine can affect humans and other animals in study. However, atrazine may still affect the reproductive system in humans by a different mechanism, which is why we should remain cautious of being exposed to the chemical. So, especially for pregnant women, so pregnant women in Mississippi County should definitely be cautious of being exposed to atrazine, especially those who live in areas where there are farms or if they live near a cornfield, because it's been known that atrazine can cause reproductive side effects. These include increased risk of miscarriage, reduced male fertility, low birth weight, risk of birth defect, and high risk of abdominal defects. Um, another concern, I apologize. Another concern with atrazine and the negative health impacts that it may have on humans is that it may increase risk of breast cancer. So those are some of the health impacts that can be related to atrazine. How are some of the ways that we can keep ourselves safe and prevent being exposed to atrazine though? So first I'll talk about safety and exposure. So um, if you work in an area where you're spraying atrazine on crops, you should avoid contact with skin and eyes. So make sure you're properly dressed when you're applying these herbicides. Make sure not to smoke or drink or eat in the workplace. For instance, I previously mentioned that farm workers and herbicide applicators and railway workers and factory workers, these are generally the people that should be on the lookout for being exposed to atrazine because they're they're um, they're at the forefront of atrazine use and exposure. So make sure to take those precautions and wear glasses, wear proper clothing, don't smoke or eat or drink, and if you are a residential user of atrazine, make sure that you store those products in closed original containers and out of reach from children and away from food, drink, and animal feed. Uh, the last part was for farmers who typically have animals. You don't want those to get into your to your animal den, or even homeowners. If you have pets, cats or dogs, you don't want them to get exposed to this stuff because it could affect them negatively as well. Obviously, so those are some things to look out for. Um, and how can we keep our families safe from atrazine exposure? How can we reduce the risk of exposure to atrazine for our families? So, as like I said previously, it's very unlikely for general population to be exposed to atrazine unless you live near areas such as farms where herbicides are abundantly used. Um, if you do happen to live near in a rural area where there's a lot of farms, um, make sure to avoid swimming in or drinking water from contaminated water sources. um, so if you have a well, make sure that you have a personal you have your well tested regularly for atrazine, and to make sure that your children avoid playing in areas where the soil may be contaminated, uh, or near sites where atrazine is utilized or discarded. Um, so those are some things to look out for your family to make sure that you're safe from being exposed to this chemical that may have negative impacts towards your health and your family's health. But what should we do if we do find ourselves in a case that we are exposed to atrazine? So, uh, first and foremost, if you have been exposed through eye contact, make sure that you immediately flush with large amounts of cool water for at least 15 minutes, occasionally lifting up and lower lids of your eye. If you have contacts, make sure to remove them. Um, if you're wearing them, especially if you're wearing them during the time of contact, uh, and, and rinse your eye. Medical attention is typically necessary if you've been exposed to atrazine through eye contact. Skin contact, typically what you'd want to do is remove clothing that has been contaminated with atrazine, and you would want to wash the contaminated skin with soap and water. And if you've inhaled atrazine, or if the person that inhaled atrazine uh, uh, has inhaled this, I'm sorry, and has inhaled atrazine, make sure to remove them from exposure and transfer them promptly to a medical center. Ingesting a chemical, a poison, typically goes straight to your bloodstream, so you don't want that to affect your systemic organs. So you'd want to go and get that checked out immediately at a medical facility. Um, but yes, so to conclude my discussion and presentation over atrazine, um, atrazine, like I said, is a pesticide. It's a herbicide uh, that is commonly used in agriculture, and it is necessary to take the precautions uh, if you live in areas that may be contaminated with atrazine. So, for instance, if you live in an area where there's a lot of farming going on, if you live near cornfields, those are areas that typically have atrazine exposure, high amounts of atrazine exposure. So make sure to take the precautions, especially if you have kids or if you're pregnant. Make sure that you regularly test your well water for atrazine poisoning, because you don't want to ingest that. You don't want to ingest that contaminated water. And if you found yourself exposed to atrazine, wash any area that may have been exposed to the chemical with soap and water. Or if you've been exposed to it through eye contact, make sure to flush it out for 15 minutes and then go immediately to a medical center. Or if you've inhaled it, make sure to uh, quickly get out of the area where you've been exposed to atrazine and find yourself at a medical facility to get checked and screened. And most importantly, keep children away from areas the pesticide may have been used. I cannot stress that enough. Just to keep our families safe and to avoid any health issues that may arise in the future. Um, and these are the sources that I've used to gain some of the information to make this discussion for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you so much.